Okay, let's pick it right back up. It's the Bob Tuskin Show on OracleBroadcasting.com. We're joined with Mark Passio of WhatOnEarthIsHappening.com, Steve Stars now of AIDSFraudVideo.com, and our good friend Popeye from FederalJack.com, and you, the listener, toll-free 866-841-1065. Steve's got a little bit of a different take on the wiener distraction for us, so I'll let him get that out. But first, let me address a question from the chat room. Will was not able to call up, so I told him I'd ask the question on air for him. And please feel free to join us in the chat. I love the interaction there. It's great stuff. Not always able to follow it as closely as I'd like to, but I'm hosting the show, for crying out loud, so bear with me. Anyways, he asked, hey, Bob, can you talk about Flight 93? He wants to get our opinion on it. So I said, hey, happy to talk about Flight 93. Of course, Flight 93 crashed in Shanksville, or supposedly crashed, I should say. And we have never, ever seen any photos of actual debris. They claim that, according to the official story, the plane vaporized. I think that was the wording they used, vaporized or whatever. Never before in history has this happened. But yet they tried to make us believe that the plane vaporized. Obviously, there's something more to it. They made a stupid movie about it to further the conditioning and mind control. And we know that on that flight, they had several passengers call up on supposedly cell phones, which were not able to be used in airplanes at the time, and say, hey, Mom, this is Bob Tuskin. You know, saying their whole full name. Like, who does that? Come on now. You're calling your mom, you're in a plane that's being hijacked.
Well, you followed that up with, you believe me, right?
Yeah, hey, Mom, this is Bob Tuskin. You believe me, right? Exactly right.
Because that's the first thing you say in an emergency situation.
Yeah, first thing, absolutely. You question whether or not your mother believes you. Anyways, there's symbolism behind it as well. And Mark, I'll let you pick it up from there.
Well, 93 is the number of thelema, which means the will. And it represents going from base consciousness to higher consciousness, 9 being the number of base consciousness and 3 being the number of higher consciousness. So this is the number that represents the climb out of lower awareness toward higher awareness. It represents the willpower and the dynamic of love that is required in order to do that, to make that journey of the mind and the soul. So this flight, I believe, was one of the missing pieces of the ritual. I think that they wanted to have another flight hit Building 7.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I've heard that as well. They were going to have it hit Building 7, and when it didn't, they still had to take the thing down.
The ritual centers around the middle pillar, which would have been symbolically represented by Building 7. Because the North Tower and the South Tower respectively represent the pillars of Jachin and Boaz, which are Freemasonic concepts of the masculine pillar of strength and the feminine pillar of beauty. In Kabbalah, these are referred to as the pillar of mercy and the pillar of severity. So the middle pillar is the pathway directly to higher consciousness. That is the synthesis factor. Okay, now we know that there's 2 different kinds of synthesis. One is the true synthesis, where you're merging the male and female in order to create something higher. Okay, the chemical wedding, it's known as in the occult. Then there's the negative form of synthesis, which is the whole principle of ordo ab chaos from the negative perspective, meaning create the chaos, invoke the reaction, and then propose the solution. So you have a thesis, an antithesis, and then a synthesis, which was what you wanted all along, was that synthesis.
Sure, the Hegelian dialectic.
Exactly. So the number 93 represents that middle pillar, the direct path of ascension, and what they're doing symbolically is they're destroying that middle pillar. That's what Building 7 was. It was the destruction of that middle pillar, which is the so-called ladder to God, as it is called in the Kabbalistic tradition. And that's the whole name of the game here, is the destruction of consciousness. They want people in fear so that they cannot become aware that they are being controlled and that they are being essentially fed off of in every way that matters. We are hosts of a parasite form of consciousness here that is these psychopaths, that is these dark Luciferians, that is these dark occultists that are currently running the show. So that's what the whole number 93 is all about. It's actually a very positive number in the occult. It's not a negative one. They are using that pillar that number to create that synthesis when it was supposed to collide in with, I believe, Building 7. Okay, I can't definitively prove that because something else intervened and something else happened and it did not arrive at the destination. Therefore, their ritual of the dialectic was left incomplete, this chaos magic ritual. I call it chaos sorcery, okay, which is the concept I'm going to be introducing on my show coming up this weekend on Sunday. They are basically, the ritual was left unfinished, and by bringing down the middle pillar, they are symbolically saying, even though this act of force did not make it, this symbolic act of force in the plane, numbered 93, did not make it to its destination, we're completing the ritual anyway. And think about it, symbolically, not even just symbolically, who brought Building 7 down?
Larry Silverstein?
The firefighters and the people who were actually in control of that whole area of that section of Lower Manhattan on that day brought it down in an act of their own will. They followed their orders and brought that building down, even though they knew no plane hit it. And it wasn't structurally damaged enough to collapse. That was no collapse. Those floors are intact.
It was
and
bold.
the distance, if you watch the collapse of 7, the distance of the floors stays consistent on the whole way down. That's not a collapse or a pancake collapse or anything of the sort. Clearly, the entire building is coming down into its own footprint because those core columns are completely blown.
They decided there was such horrible damage and loss of life that the smartest thing to do would be pull it.
Well, I know for one fact, there was one thing, it wasn't the FDNY that actually pulled it. The building would have had to have been rigged beforehand because there's no way they would have had enough time. They wouldn't have had enough time, but I know it wasn't the excuse me, I know it wasn't the FDNY because I was a first responder on that day, and most of a good portion of the FDNY was decimated because not only were the guys that were killed instantly, but there were a lot of people that were injured and just taken out of commission. They couldn't do anything, and then they did go back and dig at the pile and everything. But I do agree that it was taken down, but I know it wasn't the fire department that did it, because that's a lot of people argue and they say, you get the disinfo trolls. Oh, well, you're saying that the
government.
Firefighters and the firefighters and the cops.
Firefighters,
and I'm like, no, the firefighters and the cops didn't do it. I'm like, and a lot of people, I just don't want people to think that the FDNY wouldn't have brought the building down. That's not their specialty. But I can tell you that at least one or two chiefs were probably told by somebody maybe in FEMA or, whatever other government agency happened to be down there, hey, this building's going to go, back your men up. You already lost a bunch of guys or whatever. And I'm sure Silverstein did have a say in, but I'm sure it wasn't, again, he makes it sound like they decided to pull it right then and there. And just, I was a firefighter for 6 years, knowing the FDNY, knowing building code, knowing demolition, and having studied arson and explosive investigation for 2 years. There's no way they could have done that in one day.
Sure. And we know that. And we'll cover that and so much more in just a moment. I hear the music. We will take phone calls at 866-841-1065. And Steve Starks will be joining us for a quick segment on the Wiener Distraction. This is the Bob Tuskin Show.